Welcome everybody to the Birmingham Women in Technology Affinity Group for Tech Birmingham. We are so excited about today's program, and this is the first of many great programs that are going to come under the leadership of our new committee. So again, thank you for being here. On behalf of Tech Birmingham, Rebecca Dobrinsky and I would like to welcome you all to our program. If you are not already a member of Tech Birmingham, we would love to be able to talk to you and get to know you more and get you some information about what a membership in Tech Birmingham looks like. We'd love to introduce you to our tech ecosystem and get you involved and connected with this very engaged group of people in Birmingham. It has been just a blessing to me, not only professionally, but also I've met some great mentors and made some pretty great friendships. So we would love to share more with you about Tech Birmingham. So today I am going to kick it off to Jessica, who is one of the members of our newly appointed membership or leadership team for BWIT. I won't take up too much time because we've got a really packed schedule full of really good content. So thank you, Jessica, for...
Jessica, you're on mute, I think.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a packed day for you. I'm going to let Julie do a brief overview, and then I'll jump into introduction of the panelists.
Thanks. We're so happy to have everybody with us today for this great program, and so appreciative to our panel members. And we know that everyone for the past 7.5 months or so has been dealing with really having to juggle and balance a lot of things at home and at work, and you're dealing with your children at home and maybe doing remote school or taking care of your parents or your partner and your home and trying to juggle all this. So we really hope that today's program will give you some tips and strategies from professionals and experts that we have to hear from on how we can deal with these challenges and how do we advocate for ourselves to really make this go more smoothly and get the help that we need. So Jessica, with that, I think we can introduce the panelists.
Yes, be happy to. First today speaking will be Stacia Gaines. Stacia is coming to us with 30 years of experience in human resources, both as a generalist and now focused on talent acquisition as well as training. Stacia is a certified senior professional in human resources as well as a SHRM senior certified professional. Stacia received her education from Stanford University, where she has a bachelor's of science. Today, she is working over at Altec, one of our BWIT sponsors. You may have even had an opportunity to go on site and attend one of our BWIT functions there a couple of years ago. She's been with Altec since 2013. In addition to living in Alabama, she's had an opportunity to live in China for several years, is now back here with us in Alabama, is married and has 2 children. Our next speaker will be Dr. Josh Klapow. Josh is a clinical psychologist and he's a certified disaster mental health specialist. He works extensively with media outlets on health promotion and preparedness information. He is the author of more than 100 professional articles, abstracts, and books. And you may have noticed his book, Living Smart: 5 Essential Skills to Change Your Health Habits Forever. Josh has made numerous media appearances, over 500, and you may see him on one of our local channels, WBRC6, which he'll be on live tomorrow, so look out for him. Finally, but not last, will be Dr. Milene Ortega. She is a communication specialist dedicated to communication in leadership, conflict management, intercultural communication, negotiation, and public speaking. Dr. Ortega has her Ph.D. in communication with an emphasis on rhetoric and conflict, a M.A. in learning, and a B.A. in logistics. She has over 15 years of experience in adult learning in the corporate and academic sectors. Her professional mission is to help communities establish a more harmonious, effective, and enjoyable dialogue. We're super, super happy and excited to have all three of you join us today, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak to our group. Stacia, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get things started for us.
Thank you, Jessica. It is a pleasure to be with this group. I got a chance to meet the group when you came to Altec a couple of years ago, and even though I am not exactly a woman in tech, I mean, we're all women in tech these days, right? So I just want to share kind of a little bit of the story of what's happened at Altec since, and provide some ideas, some strategies. My goal is that each participant will get a nugget. I'm not an expert on how to work remotely or how to deal with the pandemic, but hopefully we can all just kind of be honest and realize that we're on this journey together. So like many of you, we went from a very, very hands-on, in the office kind of culture, like, and on a dime, half of our workforce that had never worked remotely, all of a sudden were in their houses trying to work. It really took some quick action on everybody's part, everybody jumping in. Little things like those associates who were hourly or who were non-exempt from overtime, like they didn't have laptops, they didn't have computers at home. So there was a big tech rush just to get them the tools that they needed to do their jobs from home. And then some of us rushed to the office within the first week or two to bring home extra monitors, printers, our keyboards, so that we could mimic as much as possible the workspaces that we had at the office. And so since the middle of March, I have been set up in my lovely guest bedroom. I was telling the panelists before we got on, you know, when I'm working in teams, I often will, you know, kind of put a Teams background, but I decided for the purposes of this today, and because I don't have any good Zoom backgrounds, I'd just show you how it was. So I'm in my guest bedroom. I've got a great view of my front yard, so I know when the firemen have been here to look at the fire hydrants, or they've installed a new light, or the gas guy comes. So, you know, I've really kind of learned what the rhythm of my neighborhood is like since March. So Altec, if you guys don't know, we are a manufacturing company, but we also have services and supplies and other things for our core customers. And we are a very relationship-based company. I mean, like, if you were at that, everything is based on relationships. And it's mostly face-to-face relationships. So remote work before mid-March was really frowned upon, which, as the talent acquisition manager, made it really challenging sometimes in the IT world to recruit talent who actually had to come into the office and put on business casual clothes and, you know, interact with other people. So it just created a real challenge for my recruiting team, on top of just a tough labor market anyway for finding good talent in IT. But our meetings, our trainings, we were always together. And I have to say that is one of the things I really miss since the pandemic, is not having a meal with people, not having an opportunity to see people face to face in the parking lot that I don't work with. But we were a very relational culture. And there were a couple of reasons that remote work had really been frowned upon. One of those was the relationship-based culture and the feeling of most leadership that people needed to be face-to-face to get to know one another and to form the kind of teams that we like to have at Altec. The second reason that was not talked about as much, but I think was equal to that, is that I think there was a lack of trust, and there was a concern that if people were working from home without oversight, without supervision, that maybe they would not be as productive as they were in the office. So I think those two reasons were why we just really had not gone to much remote work. We had started to talk about it, particularly for certain positions in IT and where there was not a need. On my team, I have recruiters, and I was allowing my team some weeks to work one day from home. But we'd not made a wholesale culture shift at all. The funny thing is that since COVID, we kind of realized that this argument was a little bit stupid, because half of our workforce at Altec, or almost half, has probably been working remotely their whole careers, and those are our mobile service techs that are our service groups, and our account managers, our outside sales folks. So we kept thinking we didn't have a culture of remote work, but we had two significant populations that were remote, and their culture was strong. So we really had kind of a mind shift since all of this. So here are some of the challenges for us as a manufacturing company. You know, this may come as a surprise to y'all, but you cannot build trucks from your house, right? So, you know, we can't get our number one product out the door without people going to the plant and fabricating and welding and painting. And I mean, that's just a fact of manufacturing. So there was already a bit of a divide between production associates and office associates. And I'm afraid that this is going to just kind of deepen that divide because, you know, there is a significant part of our population that cannot work from home because their job cannot be done from home. So there's kind of an inequity there. One of the little things, and this is on a personal note, for me, this is the first time I've had on a jacket in 7 months. I really struggled early in the pandemic with when you'd get on a call with people and they would just have this very casual background, or they'd have a baseball cap on or a t-shirt. And I just everything about that just disturbed me. And I kind of had to reckon with my feelings related to what is professional. And, you know, I think most of us that are working remotely, we just mostly dress from the waist up every day. And whether I put on makeup or not depends on whether I'm on a panel or in a meeting, or whether I'm just working on projects. But that was something that I think is changing. Professional dress, policies, we are still working on that. Because we didn't have a strong remote work culture, we're having to create policies. Or what are the expectations of how you dress? What are the expectations of work hours? What are the expectations of, you know, just fill in the blank. There's just a lot of things that we didn't have in place, even though we'd started talking about it. Small things like office supply expenses, you know, how about your pens and just the things that you need. Ergonomics and office space. Not everyone has a great office space. I felt really fortunate that my guest bedroom had a vanity that I really think was a desk that has a pull-out tray for my laptop keyboard. And I have a quiet place. I only have a dog at home, but for those with small children or school-age children, it's really tough. It's really been a struggle to get the concentration you need sometimes, and especially last spring when parents were basically homeschooling their kids while trying to work from home. So those are some challenges that we've seen. Some of the, I guess, home distractions, we've talked about that. For me, one of the biggest downers of this whole thing is those relationships and those incidental conversations, where you run into somebody in the parking lot and you ask about their kids, or you run into them at the proverbial water cooler and you have a quick chat about the football game or whatever it is. I really miss those. And so one of my strategies that I'm trying to do is when I think about somebody I haven't seen in a while, with whom that I don't come into contact with during my work, I try to shoot them a Teams chat or send them an email or call them on video chat, just to stay connected with people that I care about, but that I'm not working with from day to day. So there've been a lot of challenges, but there also been a lot of silver linings. There've been a lot of really good things that came from this. We're finding that our associates are, by and large, happier working from home. I was on the Yammer group this morning, the remote work Yammer group, and they were just talking about how they love not having to commute, how they have gotten so much better work-life balance. They're able to drop a load of laundry in and then take it out at lunch, and they just feel like they have been given a lot of time back. They have better quality time with their families and for things that they like to do. The strange thing, or the surprising thing to us, is they're more productive. They are more productive working from home. And so, it's been interesting. I don't know. At first I thought, well, maybe they're just that way because they're just so glad to still have a job and they just don't dare. But I think one of the things we're seeing is there can be less distractions. Have I got a minute, Julie? Okay. Less distractions. A good example that someone told me the other day was that there was a developer who really was slightly underperforming. Not a bad performer, but not a stellar performer at all. But since this person has been working remotely, they're above average now, and found out that they have tendencies toward ADHD, and being able to focus and concentrate from the privacy of their home instead of that bullpen environment that we had has really helped a lot of associates who need that concentration. And I think that's particularly true often of people in the IT world. So another couple of good silver linings, our travel and entertainment expenses and office expenses are way, way down. So we're actually having a great year financially, and I think a big part of that is we're not spending so much money trotting around the globe and having nice meals and drinking beer. So we've had some of that. Am I out of time, Julie?
Right there at it.
Okay. What's that, Jessica?
You're right there at it.
Okay. Let's see if there's anything else I need to. Associate engagement has been really key. I mentioned the Yammer groups. We've done some pulse surveys. Early on, leadership teams formed for different things, everything from compensation and pay to leave of absence strategies, safety in the plants, how do you make trucks and keep everybody safe. With leadership and training, we've had to really get creative with how we do training via Teams. And as a recruiter, we've had to get super creative, especially since a lot of our recruiting is done on college campuses. So there's some really great virtual platforms out there. Indeed has a new VIP virtual platform that we're trying out. And so we're just having to be more creative. But again, kind of a last silver lining is that when you're working remotely or when you're recruiting remotely, you don't have any geographic boundaries. So we can go to states that we've never recruited. We can do training across boundaries and not have to worry about people having to travel or, you know, getting stuck. So yeah, I'm just happy to share with this group. Again, no expert here, but just learning as we get through this journey.
Thank you so much, Stacia. I really do appreciate you sharing and your candor with us. So insightful. Okay, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Josh Klapow.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So as the slides are coming up, Stacia, I was gonna say, you kept saying you're not an expert in any of this, and oh, but you are. Because everything that you have talked about with all the companies that I work with, it all plays into the same thing, which is this idea of uncertainty and this idea of change. And some of the slides I'm going to talk about, and I will talk about them very briefly, really underpin everything that's going on with us. And if you look at this one slide, you know, when you think crisis, you don't really think, you know, is my Zoom background, you know, adequate or not? It doesn't sound like a crisis. Or can I balance? And I was hoping I sent Christine, I just sent a video or a picture to Christine. And I don't know if I put this in front of the camera, if y'all can see this. I'm gonna just try something. Did you get that, Christine? Did you get that picture I sent you? Maybe she did. I want.
I'll pull it up in just a second.
Okay, cool. That's cool. Thank you. And I apologize. This is I did this to her last minute. This was completely my fault. But when we talk about a crisis, you know, we tend to think of the big things. Yes, we're in a pandemic, or you think of a natural disaster. But the idea of a crisis is incredibly subjective. And so when I was thinking about some things Stacia was saying, like, what if you don't have a room to do your Zoom conference? What if your technology goes down or you don't have a laptop? What if your child runs into the middle of the Zoom presentation? What if you and your partner, you and your spouse are starting to get into conflict because everybody's working at home? So those kinds of things, while, you know, they are not maybe as objectively bad as a pandemic, they are incredibly distressful, and they can be a crisis situation. If you just think about maybe a loved one that, you know, that is sick, whether it's with COVID or not, all of these things, I was thinking of, I have a number of friends who've lost pets right now. It's not just that we're in a pandemic and we're home. It's that we're in a pandemic and we're home, and we are under a constant state of uncertainty and change. And that is good enough to be a crisis. And what I always say is crisis is in the eye of the beholder, and it doesn't have to be something huge. Go ahead and do the next slide or the picture when you get to it. So yes, I'm a psychologist, and you know, you didn't have to guess or be highly insightful to know that he was going to talk about stress. It is stressful. We are stressed. But I also want to say this about stress. A lot of times, you know, it's hard to put our heads around what is stress and what are we actually feeling. And if you think about it, it does impact across all of our experiences. It affects the way, I'm going to show this in a minute, but it affects the way we think. It affects the way we feel. It affects the way we do things. And yet we all know this, that stress is this evolutionary thing that is designed to help us survive, fight or flight, right? It helps us in emergency situations. And so where we get all messed up as humans is a lot of times our fight or flight response is kind of triggered when we're in situations of uncertainty or change, but we don't need it to be triggered. And when it gets triggered, all kinds of bad things happen. And I'm going to go through this. And this is something that's really interesting to me anyway, partly from a preparedness standpoint. And if you can remember way back when we were worried about pandemic flu, and I was involved in a lot of preparedness logistics. Imagine if you woke up one morning and you had muscle aches, fatigue, some stomach problems, dizzy, headache, dry mouth, and let's just say blurred vision. You might think you're sick. You might think you have the flu. You might think you've got the signs of COVID, right? These are early signs of COVID. These are also, as you know, the physical symptoms that come with stress. And a lot of them don't just happen in the moment. They're cumulative. We start getting the stomach ache after time. We start becoming fatigued later on. And so if you think about what stress does for us in this kind of situation, it starts building layers and layers of impact that can make us literally physically sick, and at the very least make us physically less productive. Next slide. By the way, as an old guy, I love saying that next slide, because I'm actually old enough to remember when there were slides. Like real slides that you actually could touch and hold. So I love saying that. Let's look at psychological or cognitive symptoms. Again, this is all related to stress. Look at this stuff. I guarantee you're experiencing some of this because I am too. But just think about how potentially debilitating this is. Lack of interest, memory problems, irritability, feeling depressed, anger easily. One of the things that Stacia said that, again, I'm also seeing in other companies, given the levels of stress that people experience, the fact that they're still productive or highly productive means a couple things. One, they're either powering through it, which is probably not the case, or two, they're starting to adapt, which is a really positive thing. But these are the psychological symptoms associated with stress. Next slide. Then you got all the behavioral stuff. So your physiology's changed, your thinking and your emotions are changed, and so you're either binge eating because you're bored or the food's there, or you're stressed, or you got no appetite because your stomach's upset. We're seeing huge increases in alcohol and drug use, and this is across the board, across industries, age groups, and demographics. I mean, people are self-medicating. People are, this is not the time to try to quit smoking. In fact, I'm seeing lots of relapses there. Despite the fact that some people are very efficient and very productive, a lot of folks are noticing they're less efficient. They are spending more time, they're putting more out, but their ability to do it in an efficient way is impacted. And a lot of that has to do with stress. The other piece is, and we're seeing this as well, we're seeing increases in domestic violence. We're also just seeing people get on each other's nerves, for lack of a better description. And those are the behavioral signs and symptoms of stress. If you put all that together, go to the next slide, please. I'm sorry. If you don't do anything and all that's going on, as you know, yes, you're going to feel burned out. And particularly for what we've all been going through, there are days of burnout, and then there's cumulative burnout where you kind of feel like I'm hitting the wall. But the other thing is, and this is just sort of the basic idea behind stress, that if we are in a stressful situation, a prolonged stressful situation, and particularly since we're in this state of change, this puts us at greater risk, and the research is absolutely clear here, for all of these physical conditions, including some of the autoimmune disorders, and yes, death. And so, you know, when I first started talking about this, this was, you know, we were shut down for 2 weeks, or we're working from home for 2 weeks, and then it was a month, and then it was 6 weeks. And now we're coming up on, you know, whatever, 8 months, and it may go longer. And the longer and longer it goes, not only do we have all of the problems I just described, but we're putting ourselves at risk for these health conditions and worse. And that is a fact. It's not just something that, you know, well, maybe it applies to a couple people. It's very much across the board. Next slide. I'm almost done with slides. If you can just go through this. Yes. So I've always been curious ever since, maybe this is why I became a psychologist, ever since a young child. I've always been curious when I got on an airplane and they said the following: if you're on an airplane and we lose oxygen and we need to put a mask on, I always thought this was strange. You're sitting next to a very elderly, frail person or a young child. And essentially what they're telling you to do is don't worry about the young child or the old person, the frail person, you take care of yourself. In an oxygen situation, we understand why that happens. When it comes to work and managing stress, a lot of times we absolutely don't do it. We're there for our families, we're there for our job, we're there for our partner. And the reality is, and this is particularly true if you're in a position where you hold multiple roles, you can't help other people if you're in a bad way. You become a liability to your job, to your family, to your friends, if you're not taking care of yourself. And so yes, your self-care is more important than anything else. Because if you don't care for yourself, psychologically, physically, then you can't work as well and you can't care for others. So that whole thing about, I need to do this for somebody else, it only works if you're in a good place. Otherwise, you become a liability for everybody around you. Next slide. There are books on stress management. There are weekend courses on stress management. You can take an entire year of stress management. I'm going to boil it down to 3 steps. Number 1, recognize that you've got some symptoms of stress. Those are the ones I went through. That stomach ache may be due to a physical illness. It may be due to stress. So you have to acknowledge that some of the things I'm doing or feeling could be due to stress. The second is really identify the source. It's easy to say I'm stressed because of the pandemic. That's not a source. You have to narrow it down to what is bothering me right now. Is it my family? Is it the kids? I mean, it can be more than one thing, but don't go global, go focal. Because once you can narrow it down to a couple things, then you're in a better position to actually do something about it. If it's, I'm burnt out on my family and sticking it and I'm in this house, change the situation, go walk outside. If you can't change, I'm tired from working at home, but you have to work at home, start doing what I actually heard Stacia said is start working on your thoughts around it. Hey, look, I have to work from home, but as I did this on Instagram, I have to work from home, I get to wear shorts. I haven't worn long pants in 8 months. That's for me, that's a different way of looking at it. Third thing is, and this is probably one of the most important and effective and necessary, throughout the day, do not let the physiological impact of stress get you offline. And so what that means is, yes, taking deep breaths. Yes, spending a minute or 2 off of the conference calls and relaxing. I will tell you quickly, I have one client out in California, and she was on so many back-to-back calls that she literally, and this is the truth, she was not eating, she was skipping meals. A lot of people do that. She was not hydrating because she was afraid that she wouldn't have time to go to the bathroom in between calls. That is not paying attention to your own basic bodily functions. So the idea of managing stress is not necessarily an hour of meditation. It is making sure that you're in a good place by taking frequent breaks. Last slide, I think. I would encourage you to think about stress and managing your stress a little differently. We all need a break, but we don't need one giant break. Taking what I call recalibration breaks or resetting breaks is so important when whether we're working at home or not, but particularly if we're working at home and we got 5 million things going on. About every 90 minutes to 2 hours, you need to be taking at least a couple minutes to take a deep breath, reset, refocus your head. What am I doing? Where am I going? Who am I paying attention to? What do I have next? Because if you just try to power through, the fatigue and the stress of just focus alone will bring you down, and you don't need that hour every day to unwind, you can get it in 2 to 4 minutes throughout the day. And in fact, what I find with my busy professionals that I work with, doing this allows them to keep their stress levels down throughout the day. I mean, it's great if you can take an hour or so, but by recalibrating throughout the day, then all of the changes that you're learning to adapt to, that we're all learning, they have less of a psychological and physiological impact. And then I don't know if Christine, if you're able to get that other picture up or not, and if not, it's okay.
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to get it up.
Okay, that's cool. I was just gonna show you all, and I'll do this. I don't know if you can see. I don't know if I show this on my camera, if it'll work. Can you all see that or no?
No.
No? Okay. Oh, I guess you can. Okay, never mind. I was taking a picture of, I'll describe for you. I'm sitting in, part of the reason I have this background, I'm sitting in my daughter's room. My daughter's off at college. I'm sitting here in shorts on the back of her bed with a paisley comforter with my my tube light or my circle light sitting on a pillow that has no pillowcase because she took that to college. And what's sitting behind me are pink peace signs and a fluffy, flowery circle wreath. And so, you know, you talk about making it real. I wasn't ready in this audience to go quite that real because I'm not that comfortable with y'all, and I wanted to have some semblance of professionalism. And that's it. I'll stop at that point, at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Josh. I think most people can take several nuggets from your slides for sure, because I'm checking them off. That's me, that's me, that's me, as you're talking. All right, our final panelist today will be Dr. Milene. Are you ready? Great.
Milene, you're on mute. There.
I'm muting right now. I need to set up a timer because otherwise we'll speak until 1 p.m. So let me get this here. Okay. In history, every major social technological event has caused some disruption in how we navigate time and space. When the Industrial Revolution reached the United States in the 19th century, the American society went from an agricultural social organization comprised of slow-paced days and ample space between properties to living in an urbanized setting with overcrowded housing arrangements and an accelerated relationship with time. We are currently experiencing a social event, and although on a different scale of magnitude when compared to the Industrial Revolution, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought the world to a halt and changed the ways that we study, work, socialize, and of course, communicate. Suddenly, we have been forced to stop and rethink how do we establish boundaries and how do we communicate them. So we cannot say that the world is going to be the same after enduring this pandemic. As we navigate this profound moment of social transition, we encounter all sorts of new challenges that seem to defy the limits of our resilience. My talk here comes from a background in communication, rhetoric, and philosophy. In the next few minutes, I want to share some techniques that I've gathered over the years regarding the communication of boundaries and conflict management, but in particular, conflict de-escalation. So one thing that I want us to consider is that for the longest time, societies have gone through a lot of trouble to define and enforce very clear boundaries between what was public and what was private. For centuries, the public was meant to be a space for men to discuss business and political affairs, and the private was supposed to be navigated and populated by women who were supposed to care for domestic affairs. And that boundary was so hard to break. We still have some notable hangover symptoms of this mentality. But fortunately, we have traversed this division and included women in the public and men in the private realm. That was a much needed change. With the internet and a crazy reversal through bloggers, vloggers, and influencers, suddenly the private became public. And then the public started to become concerns of the private. But then the pandemic came, And in the words of Miley Cyrus, it came like a wrecking ball because it changed everything. We are suddenly conducting businesses and political affairs in our couches and dinner tables and with our backgrounds showing in our houses, right? So, but at the same time, the public now is depending on private discretion with an individual need of masks and alcohol and impeccable hygiene and individual discipline to protect society overall. I understand that many of you may be going through the challenge of redefining the boundaries of what is acceptable or not with coworkers, bosses, family members, and these conversations can be cumbersome. So I'm bringing to you today a structure that works well for my clients, and it's pretty simple. It's composed of 3 steps. When you're talking about boundaries, you start from a positive place, and you start by validating the good things that have already happened. So you highlight the support you have already received. You talk about how you already feel that some accommodations have been made. But then you go into the second point, which is how things could be even better. So you add on something positive and you make it even, how could it even better? But the third point is the most important of them, is that you have to articulate the benefits. How do you do that? You have to articulate the benefits for you and for others, because like it or not, we live in a society that we are people-centered. We are individualistic. In fact, I often think that when we're studying art history and we see certain period defined as Illuminism and I don't know, modernism, I imagine that our time will be labeled individualism with our iPads and iPhones and my things. But the point is, unless you articulate how people will individually benefit from that boundary, people are unlikely to comply. So you need to get creative and show what are the ripple effects. If you benefit from this boundary, how are they going to be benefited as well, right? So, and that brings me to my next point, which is how to get creative when negotiations of all sorts do not go well and conflict gets out of control. I selected some de-escalation techniques from the world of conflict mediation, and they're super instrumental. When you are de-escalating conflict, you need to give a step back and you need to regain control of that situation. So I'm going to go over a step-by-step. And the first thing that you have to do is to start a conversation by posing a strategic question, a question that addresses the core of the conflict, the central element of this discussion. Then, once you pose this question, you're going to sit and listen. I know that that seems intuitive, but I'm not just saying that you're going to listen and prepare your first line of attack. No, you're going to listen in active listening. I imagine that most of you have already gone through some sort of training on active listening, but bear with me because this active listening comes from the perspective of conflict mediation, and it has some really strict rules. And the first rule for active listening in conflict mediation is that you cannot interrupt the other person. You cannot also show facial expression, so poker face throughout, okay? You cannot do like eye rolling, none of that. So, and if you are in a phone conversation, then you can occasionally send an just to encourage that person to keep on speaking and tell you more about what they are feeling, okay? So that is the first rule. The second rule is that you're going to need a piece of paper, and you're going to sit down and write everything this person is saying. You're going to write what they are saying, what words they are repeating, what's their tone, what are their concerns, right? So I want you to put as many details as you can on that piece of paper. And I say a piece of paper because the minute you open a laptop, you are creating a physical barrier between you and the person you're trying to connect. And that's not a good visual, it's not a good element for communication. So piece of paper, old school. So the third element is that you need to master the world of underlying issues. If you have never heard of underlying issues, not to worry, I got you. Conflicts are never about the subject they seem to be about. They're always about something else. So if you look at two kids fighting over a toy, you would think that the conflict is about the toy, But if you sit down and talk with those kids, you will see that it's about other stuff. It's about inability to share resources, or because they feel that it's not fair, or because they're not feeling respected, or because they're not feeling validated. So your job is to try to figure out what is the engine of this conflict? What is the underlying issue that is actually making this person engage in this conflict, right? And why you should do that is because if you're able to tackle the deep down issue, then you don't waste your time talking about the toy, right? And on that note, here's another invaluable hint. Watch for dialectical tensions. Dialectical tensions are when you have two ideas that run in opposite direction. So when they are going in opposite directions, they are kind of irreconcilable, so you have to navigate them. And in the American culture has been rooted in the balance between a number of dialectical tensions, but there is one that is central, which is order versus freedom. Order is going to be a value and a priority for folks who are averse to the idea of chaos, madness, mass, anarchy, all of that, right? And freedom is going to be a value that people will hold on to when they are averse to the idea of tyranny and authoritarianism or control, all of that, right? And navigating this tension is kind of in the DNA of American culture. You will see this tension translated pretty much everywhere. If you read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography, you're going to see he's always concerned about how can we balance how can we balance discipline and liberty? Again, order and freedom. So if you connected the dots and you thought about how this is still a huge debate in the political sphere, you're right on track, because that's my point. This is a tension that permeates every level of social interaction. And if you look carefully at the conflicts you are experiencing at home or at work, it's likely that there are traces of this dialectical tension there. And so knowing this can help you navigate those, and knowing how much you have to sway to one side or the other, whether it is a teenage daughter who wants more freedom, or if it's a coworker who needs more structure. That's still this dialectical tension. I'm sorry, I went on a long tangent. It was an important parenthesis that I had to do. So let's go back to active listening. There's a fourth element, which is the last one, the fourth and last element of active listening, which is when you're active listening, once the person is done, you need to provide a restatement session. This is the crucial moment, because in this moment, you need to make this person feel understood. You need to make them feel like they're heard. So you're going to say, if I understood you correctly, you are concerned about this, because of that, because of this other thing, you're feeling this way. I noticed this underlying issue here, right? So you're going to address all of that. And your job is to make sure that once you're done with your restatement session, you're going to ask, is this an accurate depiction of what you just said? Did I say the right thing? Did I understand you? And that person has to say a very clear yes. That's right. That's what I meant. Because the minute this person does that, they are releasing a little bit of oxytocin, which is a very important hormone. Am I right, Joshua? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So oxytocin is the release is the hormone for social connection. It's the hormone of love, blah, blah, blah. But it's the hormone of social bond. Right? If the person releases a little bit of that, it means that they're starting to open up towards trust, towards believing in you. And this is a very powerful moment. So you have to be super careful here, because this conversation is starting to go in a positive direction. And then I urge you to be super careful with what you're going to say next, because if what you're going to say goes in the opposite direction of what they just said, then you need to tread that lightly. Be careful on how you get there. You start from a point where you see the connection between your ideas and the ideas of the other person. You start from there, and then you build upon it. And you should do that using words of addition, which are, oh, I would add, and in addition, piggybacking on what you're saying, I agree, and also, right? So these are words of addition. So you should stay away from words of subtraction, such as, however, but except, because then you're kind of creating, those are trigger words, and they tend to invalidate the thing that they heard before. You know, when people listen to a compliment and they also start saying, they kind of start articulating that they're waiting for a but and a criticism before after that. So those are trigger words. We want to stay away from that. I saw the time, and we could go on and on about this subject, and I was probably too ambitious on how much content I could cover in 10 minutes. I brought these conflict management techniques to support your journey of building bridges and strengthening your social connections, both in public and in the private setting. I hope they are helpful, and I look forward to the questions and concerns that you might bring to us. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is great. Appreciate it. Just going to queue up questions from our audience next. I don't believe that we received any via email. If you do have a few questions, we have time allotted now for questions to our panelists. Please go ahead, jump on the chat and fire away. Okay, well, I'm giving everybody a chance to type in some questions. We have several resources that we'll be sharing with you. I'm not sure if you have that on the slide, Christina, that you could pull up. How to set work from home expectations with your boss. How to ask for a flexible schedule that you need. How to have difficult conversations and stay true to yourself, as well as coronavirus, how to protect your mental health. So we'll be sharing those with everyone. Great links. Panelists, do you have a little quick thing that came to your mind maybe that you want to share while we have a few minutes? Encourage you to do so.
I was just going to say, in listening to Dr. Ortega's presentation, you know, one of the things I think is super important to remember, that when you're trying to implement the things that Dr. Ortega is talking about, your underlying emotional state, i.e. how stressed out you are or not, will make those methods either easier or more difficult, more productive or less productive. It's not to overcomplicate it either on my side or Dr. Ortega's, but there is an intersection between how you are and then what you're trying to communicate. I'm seeing that she's nodding, but it really came home for me when I was listening and watching her presentation.
Thank you.
For sure, and I would add that it has all those elements of the physiological symptoms, right? So if you're stressed, you're not breathing very well, you're not oxygenating your brain, you are not thinking straight. So of course, it's going to be much, much harder for you to engage in those steps, for sure. Very good point.
Great, thank you. Julie, I want to turn it over to you for some information about our next event.
Thanks, Jessica. I want to thank Jessica for moderating, and thank you so much to our panel members, Stacia, Dr. Josh, Milene. It was a very informative presentation. I know you put time into preparing and sharing that with us, and I really appreciate the wealth of knowledge and great ideas. I took notes, great ideas that hopefully we can all take back and employ. And I did want to let everyone know our next program will be on November 18th. That one might be later in the afternoon, kind of at the end of the work, and we will start our small group empowerment session, where we'll probably be having a group together and then breaking out into small groups to work together on trying to support each other in a smaller group there. So we'll be sending something out soon about the next session, and look for that so you can sign up.
Well, we have one question that came in. Let me read this to everyone. This is specifically pointed to Stacia. You mentioned the division environment, specifically that the manufacturing and the office teams may be experiencing. The question is, how in your experience has that been managed?
So it's easier at the corporate environment, but I've also been at the plant environment, and I think one of the things that we've tried to do is where we could provide equity to do so. For example, and this is going to sound kind of silly, but when I first got to the plant, the salaried team had a separate Christmas party. And I was like, no, it is an all associate party, or we don't have it, because that, so I mean, just trying to be as inclusive as possible when we can, make accommodations for those who say do have to be in the plant, making sure that every associate feels important, because they are. And I would actually say that those building the product are probably more important than those of us who, you know, are sitting at home looking at recruiting strategies. So those are just a couple of things.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for answering that for us. I do not see that any other questions have come in at this time, so we will give everyone about 3 more minutes back to your day. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you, talking to you in November. Bye-bye.
So I was able to get that picture.
There
Here. This is where Dr. Josh is presenting from.
That's
I like the setup.
Thank you, Christine. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for being here. This was very informative, and I feel like there was so much more that we could have unpacked, and I think we might need to invite each of you back individually for, you know, a longer presentation, because I felt like we were just getting going, and you know, and then we wanted to move on to the next, you know, presenter because of the content. And so I think there's so much more that we can unpack. And so I think we might need to, even with our navigating the new normal, we might need to, you know, invite some of you back to discuss a little bit more some of these topics. So thank you all. Audience, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.